Hi there, I'm Vincent Boss and I provide dating and self-improvement advice. And in today's podcast, we're going to be discussing You Will Hear From Your Ex Again. Explained. I provide audio coaching for breakup recovery, trying to get an ex back, attracting someone new, and life coaching. Visit www.dateme.tips for more details. Please check your spam and junk folders if you are expecting an email from me. Check out my socials for extra content. The links are in the description. So now let's get back into today's podcast. And today we are discussing You Will Hear From Your Ex Again. Explained. So if you have been dumped and want to try to get your ex back, you will be desperate to hear from them. In today's podcast, I'll be giving you 3 points to consider about hearing from your ex again. So let's get straight into this. And point number 1 is you have more influence than you think. So when you've been dumped, one of the first thoughts which will likely go through your mind is, I didn't want this to happen. I did not want this to take place. What I wanted was for us to remain together. And therefore, what I wanted didn't happen. And instead, what my ex-dumper wanted did happen. Therefore, I don't have any influence. I had no influence at the time of the breakup. They didn't listen to me. They didn't want to know my thoughts. They didn't care about my feelings. And therefore, they won't have any care about my feelings going forward. I have no influence in the future. Now, this is where I would suggest, dumpies, you might be slightly wrong, because I do believe you have more influence than you think. You have influence regarding the future. Now, of course, your ex will make their own ultimate decision if they want to reach out to you, if they want to reconsider and maybe possibly reconnect. Of course, if you still want to by that point as well, yes, they have a decision to make. Yes, that is their choice. But the way you behave, dumpies, post-breakup will have a huge influence regarding what your ex-dumper does in the future. Now, right now, they're living their life in their own way, on their own path. But it doesn't mean they forgot you. Of course, they will always remember you. You will always be at the back of their mind, often at the front. Triggers can come thick and fast, especially in the first year or so post-breakup. You will be on your ex-dumper's mind fairly regularly. And even beyond a year, you will still pop into their mind every so often, maybe very often. So, as we can see, there are plenty of opportunities for your ex-dumper to potentially reconsider their decision. Now, whether they do or whether they don't will be somewhat influenced by how you have behaved during this time. Because when you cross their mind, this is what I would refer to as a crossroads moment. Now, some of which are bigger than others. There are moments which we could refer as the crossroads. That moment where your ex-dumper is really on the verge of looking left or looking right. Whether they reach out to you or whether they decide they probably shouldn't do it. They are major crossroads moments. However, every single time they think of you could be somewhat described as a crossroads. When they think of you due to a trigger, maybe it's an anniversary, maybe they have travelled to a location that you and them used to spend time together. Maybe they have eaten a meal that you always used to cook them. And they're just thinking, oh, this doesn't taste as nice as when my ex-dumpy used to cook this for me. There are so many potential triggers. But when they take place, they will have that moment of how they remember you. Maybe the trigger brings an initial good memory or an initial not so good memory. But beyond that trigger, they will consider you in different ways depending on how you have behaved post-breakup. And this is where you have influence. Because although we can only control the controllables, that is something which is really valuable right now. Because the controllable that you can control is yourself. Now, are you going to be someone who lives your life to the full, makes new connections, becomes a version 2.0 of yourself, becomes a dateable individual? Or alternatively, are you going to chase your ex out of town? If you bombard your ex or dumper with messages, with calls, with knocks on their door, even if you don't think you're bombarding them, but instead you just feel that you want to reach out every so often, even though every time you've done it previously, you've been knocked back. If you behave in that way, that is going to be annoying your ex. And think about it. If you've been dumped, unfortunately, the reality is your ex-dumper is not viewing you in a positive light, especially regarding romance and romantic relationships. Now, do they see you in a positive way in other ways? Well, maybe. Some dumpers want to remain friends. So they would see you in a positive light, but not a positive romantic light. Not for romance. Okay? And you need your ex-dumper to view you as a romantic option. So they're already not viewing you as an ideal candidate to be in a relationship with. So the last thing you want to do is annoy them. Think about it. They are already feeling a low level of romantic emotional attraction towards you. Do you want to raise that level, or do you want to lower that level? If you want to raise that level, you need to be behaving in an attractive way, focusing on yourself, growing as a person. Or do you alternatively want to lower that level even further to almost zero? Well, if you want to do that, then what could you do? Well, you could annoy your ex. And what would annoy them? Well, here's a suggestion. Annoying your ex would be not listening to them. If you don't listen to what they are saying, that is going to annoy them. And what have they said? Well, at the time of a breakup, unfortunately, they've said, I don't want to be with you anymore in a romantic way. So if you keep bombarding, chasing, constantly going at your ex, even if you leave some time in between your messages, that is still going to be annoying your ex if they keep saying, thanks but no thanks. So think about it. You want to be raising that level of attraction, not reducing that level of attraction. And that is where you have the influence. So when we're talking about how and whether you will hear from your ex again, yes, you can. Because you can influence the decision by raising the level of romantic emotional attraction in their mind. Now, can we guarantee that even if you do everything right, quote unquote, you will get your ex back? No, we can't guarantee that. There is no 100% guaranteed way to get your ex back, but you will certainly improve your chances. And this is why dumpies need to recognise you do have a level of power and influence. Because if you behave in the wrong way, you will not hear from your ex again. Whereas alternatively, if you behave in the right way, the best way, the most attractive way, then most of you will hear from your ex again. And therefore you will have an opportunity to reconnect. Wherever you do or whether you don't will obviously depend on the communication stage and the meeting stage beyond that. But that first step is actually getting your ex-dumper when they're at the crossroads to think, yes, you know what? I want to speak to my dumpy again. So now let's get into point number 2 and the second point of today's podcast. Please like this video if you're watching on YouTube and subscribe to the channel. And point number 2 is almost 50% get their ex back. So today we're speaking about you will hear from your ex again and the explanation as for why I believe you have a wonderful opportunity of hearing from them again. And point number 2 is that almost 50% get their ex back. Now, there has been numerous studies on whether people reconnect after a breakup, and they seem to bounce around in the percentages between 40 and 60%. Some studies suggest it's as low as 40%. Some studies suggest it's as high as 60%. So if you're looking at the average, you're thinking and you're viewing it at about 50%. Now, what does that mean? That means, well, 1 in 2 people are going to get their ex back. So that is fantastic odds straight away. Because when you've been dumped, you think, well, there's no chance I'll ever get my ex back. Well, listen, half of you will. Now, here's the best bit. Even though, unfortunately, half of you won't, that doesn't mean that half of people won't hear from their ex again. Now, what that means is that sadly, they don't reconnect. So we can view it as more than 50% will hear from their ex again. Most of you will hear from your ex again. Now, there will be 50% on average that sadly don't reconnect after they have been speaking once more. Now, this is where point number 1 links in. Remember when we were talking about how you have influence? Because it's not just influence post-breakup, hoping for your dumper to reach out. No, this is influence during the communication stage as well. Because if and when your ex-dumper reaches out to you, which as we've established, the likely percentage of which will be more than half. Remember the studies on average suggest 50% of you will get your ex back, but that means that more than 50% of you will hear from your ex, but sadly, some won't go beyond the communication stage. Well, this is where your influence fits in. It ties in. If you can behave in an appropriate way, which is attractive, and someone who wants to reconnect in the right way during the communication stage, then if and when you hear from your ex, which more than half of you will be able to turn this around. It's only the percentage of people who sadly fail at the communication stage that won't get their ex back from that point. Of course, there will be some dumpies who themselves decide they don't want to reconnect. I mean, when we consider that side of it, it shows that those dumpies who want to reconnect, well, that is an even greater chance of you wanting to get your ex back, because some dumpies hear from their ex and don't want to reconnect by that stage. And of course, that would still fit into those studies. So there's an even better chance that if you want to, and if you hear from your ex, that you will if you do the right things. And this should give you a lot of motivation to become a better version of yourself, because you're likely to get that chance. If 1,000 of you are listening right now, more than 500 will hear from your ex again. Think of it like that. Most of you will. And if you want your ex back, you can turn this around. I can't guarantee you will get your ex back, but the studies suggest that you will have a very good chance. The studies suggest that it is more in your hands than you might think. And this is why you've got to be putting in the work now, behaving in a way now to initially get your ex to reach out to you, and then learning and understanding what you need to do if and when you hear from them to make sure you get this over the line to reconnect with your ex, the dumper. If that is what you desire, you stand every chance of achieving it. Now, you can't be putting all of your eggs in one basket. This should never be about, it's my ex or nothing, because there is no guarantees. And even if you don't get your ex back, if you live your life in the way that I've been discussing today, you can find someone even better than your ex, the dumper. So it's win-win. You either get them back or you find someone even better. Don't be fearful. Don't be frightened. The future is certainly bright. Now, if you would like advice and support about how to try and increase the chance of one day getting your ex back, then you may want to consider my audio coaching service, where me and you can speak one-on-one about your unique specific situation. Go to my website, www.dateme.tips, for more information about how I can become your coach and your teammate via my audio coaching service. Talking about your feelings can also improve your mental health. It helps prevent the build-up of negative emotions, which can lead to stress, anxiety, depression, and even physical health issues. Speak your heart to free your mind. So now let's get into point number 3 and the final point of today's podcast. If you feel that this podcast has helped you, then please consider buying me a coffee. The link to do so is in the description. And point number 3 is listen carefully. So today we're speaking about you will hear from your ex again, and the explanation as to why that is the case. But you do need to listen carefully. Listen very carefully. And what can you hear right now? Well, if the answer is silence, then silence speaks loudest. Remember that. You are still hearing from your ex, even if you hear nothing. What you're hearing is that they don't currently want to interact with you. Now, this is really, really important. Don't dismiss this. It's huge. If you want to get your ex back, remember what we've said so far. Don't annoy your ex. Remember that patience is key. Remember that although we can't guarantee you'll get your ex back, what we can say is that you stand a very good chance of hearing from them again if you behave in the right way. And annoying them is not the right way. So if you're hearing nothing right now, that is actually them speaking loudest. What it's saying is, please don't contact me. Now, there are some occasional caveats to this. There are unique circumstances. I can't predict what yours are unless me and you've spoken via my audio coaching service. I don't know for those of you who are listening. But what I can say is that most of you will fall into the category that if you have been dumped, you should never contact your ex again unless they contact you first. Most of you will fit into this. And therefore, if you haven't heard from your ex, that means they are shouting, they are screaming, they are speaking loud and clear through their silence. I don't want to speak right now. Please listen to those words. I don't want to speak right now. I don't want to communicate. I don't want to hear from you. If you don't listen to their silence, you will chase them away for good. Again, there will be some unique, specific circumstances that might not fit into this, but most of you will. Most of you will fit into the category that you've been dumped, and you should never contact them again unless they contact you first, because if you don't abide by their silence, you are going to annoy, frustrate, and chase them away for good. And you won't be one of those people in that larger than 50% percentage but hear from your ex. You won't be in that category. You will be in that category of people that don't hear from them again because you've annoyed them so much that they've blocked you, that they've put a restraining order on you, and that they are now at the point where they are feeling quite freaked out by your behaviour. So, consider your specifics. Understand that every situation is different, but remember that most of you probably fall into that category of you shouldn't contact your dumper again unless they contact you first. Now, if you have an important, genuine emergency situation to reach out to them, of course you should reach out, but only if it is necessary, only if there is a reason. If you're thinking, well, I haven't said my piece at the time of a breakup, I didn't say it, well, again, maybe your circumstances would allow that. Let's just say you've been accused of something you didn't do and you never actually said your piece. Well, of course, you can try and tell them post-breakup, but your specifics will be unique to you. And most of you don't fall in that category. Most of you, sadly, have been dumped and you need to respect their decision. And if they haven't said anything in a verbal, in a textual, in whatever kind of way, then remember they're still speaking to you, because listen carefully, because silence speaks loudest.